Hello. Been a while since I've done one of these. I took the week off last week from doing Jim's L tag. Just wasn't really feeling up to it at the time. But another week has gone by. Today we are presented with M. And Jim was so kind as to shout me out in the video, so I'm obligated to do this tag. And he mentioned me because the first prompt is M is from Manchester, but then he presented a whole string of other cities that begin with the letter M, including Minneapolis, which is why he brought me up. I will say that I am not from Minneapolis. I was born in St. Paul and lived there for the first year or so I was alive. Then moved out to the suburbs on the west side, which is Minneapolis is on the west side of the metro area, and St. Paul's on the east. And then I went to college in Minneapolis, and then after that I lived for a number of years in St. Paul. So I've lived in both, but I am from St. Paul technically. But I have spent probably more time in Minneapolis because I grew up on the Minneapolis side of the city. Anyways, the question is, what's your favorite book in a city that begins with an M? So I'm going to say Minneapolis. Minneapolis writing, there's a very rich history here of authors who are from here, like F. Scott Fitzgerald, of course, from St. Paul. Louise Erdrich is from Minneapolis. You've got John Sandford, the mystery writer, and many of their books are set here. John Sandford's books, the Prey series, are set in Minneapolis and in Minnesota. You've got William Kent Kruger, who's another mystery writer. His books mostly take place in northern Minnesota, though, but he lives in the cities. I've met him a couple times. But my favorite book set in the Twin Cities is a book that's not by an author from the Twin Cities, and that is Freedom by Jonathan Franzen, which takes place primarily in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Freedom was written... Jonathan Franzen was very, very close friends with David Foster Wallace, and Freedom was written in the wake of Wallace's suicide, and it was an intentional effort by Jonathan Franzen to write a book about male friendship, which I think is a topic that doesn't get written about or discussed a lot. Platonic male friendship. It involves a sort of love triangle, I guess, between these two male friends who meet in college. One of them is a sort of punk rock musician, sort of rock star personality, and the other one is sort of a more quiet, nerdy, loner type, and then a girl who they both sort of vie for, but then she ends up with the quieter one, but then always sort of secretly pines for the other one, and it follows their lives over the course of 20 or 30 years or something like that. It's a very excellent book. Jonathan Franzen, on a personal level, I think he's kind of an asshole. He's very sure of himself and says things very dogmatically that are very annoying. This is a paraphrase, but one time he said something along the lines of no one who is writing on a computer that's connected to the internet is writing anything worth reading, because the internet is going to distract you or something. Extremely, extremely stupid take. He's got a lot of stupid takes, and he's very pompous, which is unfortunate. But I have read 2 of his books, and I have liked both of them quite a bit. So if I'm going to pick my favorite book that's set in my hometown, it's going to be Freedom. It's a great book. Check it out. Prompt 2, M is for murder mystery. Is there a better murder mystery than Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None? I have to admit, I have not read anything by Agatha Christie. I've seen a lot of like movies and masterpiece mysteries and all of that. My parents are very, very into masterpiece mysteries and like Poirot and all of that. And it's just it's just not my thing. It's not. I don't. Not super intrigued and interested by it. Nothing wrong with it. Just not what I'm excited by, I guess. My favorite like mystery. It's not really a murder mystery, but is Night Film by Marisha PESSL. I've talked about this book before. It's a very interesting book about the daughter of a sort of legendary and reclusive filmmaker, dies under sort of mysterious circumstances, and then this private detective is investigating what happened. Very good book. Very cool sort of mixed media stuff going on with it. That was I don't think very many people had done things like that before at the time this was coming out, which was in like 2013, I believe. M is for Magic Realism. What was the first book you read in the genre of magical realism? The first book I read in magical realism was Isabel Allende's In the House of the Spirits, which I read for school when I was a senior in high school, I'm pretty sure. It was either a junior or a senior. And I liked it okay. It was, I feel like it's hard to really like give yourself over to a book you read for school. I didn't really feel like I was able to do that until I was in college, at least. But it was a good book. I don't remember it super duper well. But I have gone on to read many other books of magic realism, and two that I count among my all-time favorite books would be The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami, which is my favorite Murakami book, one of my favorite books of all time, which is about a man who, his cat disappears, and then shortly after his wife disappears, and then he sort of goes on this like surreal metaphysical journey, mostly a journey into the self, to try and find the things he has lost, which a lot of it involves climbing down into the bottom of a well with a baseball bat and like astral projecting into other people's minds. It's a very weird book. And then my other favorite magical realism book is, the sort of the standard classic of the genre, which is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which concerns numerous generations of the Buendia family over the course of 100 years, and how they are reborn and reincarnated, and how the world around them shifts. And it's considered one of the greatest novels ever written, and I think that is justified. M is for maps. What is your favorite map? This is an interesting question. I think my favorite maps are like weird maps of the U.S. that break things down by region. Like the one that comes to mind is like America by what people call fountain soda pop beverages, whatever you want to call them. So like here in Minnesota, predominantly people say pop. In other parts of the country, people predominantly will say soda. And in parts of the South, people will say Coke as a catch-all for everything. So they'll say, like, I want a Coke. What kind of Coke? I want a Mountain Dew. Not winning points for the South there, in my opinion. But just those maps of, like, breakdowns of the country and how regional dialect and things like that change and shift. Another really great map is the map of the time zone breakdowns in the United States, which make absolutely no sense whatsoever. They are so arbitrary and weird and dumb, and they kind of amuse me, though. So those are the maps I enjoy. M is for Mississippi. What is your favorite story set on the Mississippi? Well, I did just talk at length about my hometown, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Famously, the Mississippi River flows directly through Minneapolis and St. Paul. It flows, it abuts the downtown areas of both Minneapolis and St. Paul. It kind of comes down like this along the downtown of Minneapolis, and then it sort of like hooks up, and then it comes down, and then down along the downtown of St. Paul, and then just keeps going south. And the Mississippi River headwaters, of course, are at Lake Itasca in northern Minnesota. That's where the river starts. But in the interest of not just talking forever about Minnesota, I will choose a book set where the Mississippi River ends, which is, of course, in Louisiana. So I will choose the classic of New Orleans, A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. A book that I have mentioned many times and will probably continue to mention many times. It is so funny, so charming, just a wonderful, absolutely unforgettable book that everybody should read. M is for Muslim. What is the last book you read with a Muslim protagonist? I am going to have to think about this, because I can't think of any off the top of my head. Yeah, I cannot think of a single book I have read that has a Muslim protagonist in it, which is absolutely abhorrent and shows how uncultured I am outside of the Western canon. I've read a smattering of Latin American writing. I've read some Japanese writing, but most of what I've read has been, either North American or European, and that's unfortunate. It is something that I am very keenly aware of and want to change, though. So if you've got recommendations, obviously Kite Runner is going to probably be the most popular one, and I've never read Kite Runner, and I'm not super interested in reading Kite Runner. But if you have other recommendations, please let me know. M is for Mars. What is your favorite book about Mars or Martians? I have to copy Jim on this one and say Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. What a great book. Robert Heinlein, complete piece of garbage on a personal level, but Stranger in a Strange Land, very good book. My dad got me to read it when I was youngish, high school. And the protagonist of it has a very similar name to my father, Valentine Michael Smith. My father's name is Michael Smith, though it's spelled, my dad's name is spelled differently than the standard spelling of Michael. And it's about a man, Valentine Michael Smith, who is raised by Martians, and then because of that gains extra human abilities, and then he returns to Earth, and it basically is sort of a Christ figure, and creates this religion, basically, and it's a very weird, very interesting piece of science fiction, and it's unlike, the only other thing I've read by Heinlein is Starship Troopers, and they're very different books. Very different tone, very different sort of way of looking at space in science fiction. And, I prefer Stranger in a Strange Land. And if you can, get the uncut version. I think it's a little bit harder to find. You might have to go out of your way to get your hands on it, but it is out there. When I read it, my dad had, I think it was an Easton Press leather bound copy of the uncut version. That was how I read it, and so I recommend that. M is for must read. What is a book that you feel you must read? In terms of like the ones that I haven't gotten to that are like bucket list books, the one with like the greatest cultural significance is probably Ulysses. It's just like such a obvious urtext to so many things that I like. So many things that I like are either directly indebted to or, one step removed indebted to Ulysses and to Joyce. So it feels like it has to happen eventually. So that's my pick there. M is for Margaret. What is your favorite book by Margaret Atwood? I've only read one, and it is The Handmaid's Tale. It is a very good book. I have a couple others of hers on my shelf, Oryx and Crake, and the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, and The Blind Assassin, and I will read them someday, but as it stands, I have to say Handmaid's Tale, because it is the only one I have read. And finally, M is for Margaret Pinard. Have you read any of her books? I didn't know who she was. It turns out that she is an author and a booktuber, and the books of hers that Jim has read and talks about don't sound super up my alley. Historical fiction, immigrant story, 19th century stuff. Not to say that like those stories are boring or anything. It's just it doesn't grab me, I guess. But I am always open to trying, and Jim liked them a lot, so I'm gonna throw them on my Goodreads TBR and keep them in mind. So yeah, we'll see. All right, this one's short and sweet. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good night.